All right, Johnny.
Yes.
Here, I'm going to turn my hat around so it's a different setting. Wardrobe change. So we got Johnny Ferentz. He's one of our guys in Central, as I learned. I thought it was North Central. It's Central Nebraska. Where are you at?
Ord,
Nebraska. There you go. Shameless plug. And Gibbs. Needs no introduction because he is Gibbs.
Back in action again.
That's right. Ride 2.0.
Yep.
Been it myself. So we did another podcast with Travis. Yes. And at the end of that podcast, man, we started diving into the nitrogen talk. And we ran out of time because there's only so many gigs on a card. So we're going to talk about nitrogen. Johnny's got a history, or his background is agronomy. So I wanted to pull, but agronomy, so you've probably been taught everything that the institution teaches, but at the same time you've got
What institution?
Don't get me started on institutions.
That upper education is what
Higher education that you pay a lot for. But you've got the real world experience of working with farmers, seeing soil tests, sap tests, everything else, and kind of taking the step back and seeing that this may not always make sense, the conventional teaching in this scenario, so on and so forth, and coming at things from an agronomist perspective, where I wanted to bring that view of things in, and we started talking about nitrogen. Ben and Johnny last night, I was just listening. It was a fascinating conversation. We were talking about nitrogen and chloride in plants, particularly corn, and then we were talking in the last podcast about balances and imbalances in soil. Yep. So I wanted to talk, who knows where this thing's going to go, but I wanted to start out with the nitrogen chloride talk, and then imbalances in a declining ag economy, because that's a huge topic right now. Guys are concerned about declining ROI and declining grain markets. So how do we handle this scenario while fixing common issues in our fields and correcting things on a profitable level where it makes sense?
Go, Johnny. Go. Okay.
Welcome. Yeah.
So, yeah, we talked about that. We're just talking about FOSS 624.6 with
Travis.
no him.
Garrett. Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah.
My bad.
Get it straight, yeah.
Yeah. So declining market. The hardest thing is he going to cut something? Like everybody's going to have to cut something, right? And what do you want to cut that's not going to sacrifice yield? Because if you cut something and it costs you yield, then you just double lost. Double down your loss, if not more. And so what exactly do you do? And Gibbs you're just looking at a test, and this is what spurred that last talk was, What do you do in a deal to optimize your really good scenario that you had set up on that field in that deal, that test there? What exactly would you move to optimize it on a declining market plus to hit, 350 bushel corn?
Yes.
So,
I know you want to sell me rain.
huh?
I know you want to sell me rain.
Yeah. I'll gift it.
I would buy it from you.
I'll gift some.
At this point.
At this point, I would.
Just don't
Every
drill.
other year, I would
Just
not.
don't drill any wells. They won't last.
I know.
Because the gold.
The
all
The
the
gold to
gold.
plug the wells.
It's all right. Just clean that pump out.
Yeah.
Scrape it out.
How do you, on that field, so let's kind of pick back up on that field, shoot for 300 plus?
Yes. With adequate rain. Let's say we do get adequate.
Is this field one where you're farming for agronomics? Like you
Both.
really
I know
want
where you're
to
going
bust the
with this.
bubble with this thing?
I want to bust the bubble, but I don't want to spend every day out there foliar feeding at midnight like I did last year.
Intensive management,
I
but
want to
not
manage
insane
it smart,
management.
but it still has to be profitable. I'm not going to do this just to say I grew 300 and some bushel corn or 400 bushel corn, but I lost $75 an acre.
Right.
I want to be able to do this and be like, hey, you can sustainably grow, and I hate the word sustainable. You can, let me back
That's a
that
lot
up.
coming from Gibbs.
I want to profitably grow high yield with minimal inputs.
Yeah,
That's a good way to say it.
that's profit.
Like, I didn't just go out there and dump down this much N and this much P and this much K. And we foliar fed it 8 times. We did 3 applications of fungicide. My goal is I'm not doing any fungicide on that field. I'm going to refuse to do fungicide because that field has not seen fungicide in 3 years since we went away from it. My goal is if there's a disease or we should be able to pick it up in the plant sap before it shows in the plant. But if we are low in certain nutrients, let's get out there and maybe foliar apply them while we can at an earlier age. And I'm also going off last year's sap analysis on what we were low in. So I kind of got last year's report card to kind of go off of. I mean, it's not going to, every year's a little bit different, but I can see, well, last year we were short in this, this, and this. We did see it as a result. Maybe we need to apply at Y drop foliar with the planter.
Johnny, have you seen?
And I don't plan on using insecticide, only as a rescue agent.
Ben talks a lot about rescuing.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be
So,
a massive
Instead of
threshold. for me
moving
to put it. I do not-
preventative out of the program.
I'm not organic.
Sure.
Throw that out there. But I do not want to use a pesticide, and I do not want to use a fungicide. Don't get me wrong, there's probably some stuff on the seed treatment. But besides that, you know.
Okay, so if we imagine this glass is a corn plant,
If
okay?
you're listening to this on only audio, this is available on YouTube.
Yeah.
Shameless
So this,
plug.
It's
You watch it there.
it is clear, it is half full of water.
that is exactly right. So a corn plant, most people think that it's gonna take in what it needs, so it can only hold so much.
Yep.
It's not an indefinite thing. It's obvious. It's a physical thing, and it can only hold so much. People assume you put it around the plant, and it will only take in what it needs.
Yep.
That is true to an extent. Nitrogen, chloride, and there's one more. But those two in particular have no controlling deal. So if you keep putting it in there, you start filling your cup with those, not your elements that it needs, that it actually has to work to get. So like phosphorus and potassium and calcium and things like that. So when I tell people in the down market, cut in first, because in will make all your other things more efficient, like we were talking a little bit before. Get the nutrients, the heavy elements that they have to use biology to work with, in before it fills up with all your nitrogen and your other junk. Your nitrogen, calcium. Is it sulfur? There's one other
think so.
element.
I thought potassium you can get in excess of. Like
You can
it'll
get in-
overconsume
Yeah.
if it's too available per
Yeah.
se.
I know it can draw or create an issue too. There's one.
But would
just
that be tied to chloride? No.
When you look at the elemental charts on what's positive and negatively charged, you want to try to keep a balance of positives and negatives.
Yep.
That's getting pretty in depth. Like,
Yeah.
as a farmer, that's in depth above my. But I'm trying to learn it
Because
because
that's the rabbit hole I like to dig
Yeah,
into.
it's a rabbit
That's what I'm
hole.
about.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
the
like-
positives and
yeah,
negatives.
you
Yeah.
put all this
Yeah.
stuff out there. Well, that's all negative charge stuff. We need enough positive charge stuff to balance it.
Yep.
You know.
And so it can't control those elements. So you're going to fill your whole cup up before you can even get anything else in there. So a plant's mechanism, okay, I'm full of this. Well, once it gets calcium and water, then you get a big tall plant. And it's compensating for an overfull cup.
Yep.
And so it's trying to suck that in. So you get this big, long, lengthy corn with no yield. And then if you're forage, that's okay. But we've proven recently it's not all about stock overall.
Because you can have
height.
mass quantity of plant, but you have poor quality plant.
Yeah, and then feed availability, milk content, things like that go down. Or relative, what is it? Digestibility was
Yeah.
a factor? Yep.
Digestible nutrients. In
Yep.
It. Yep.
It goes down as you go up. But essentially, your number one thing that you're spending money on is driving the problem that it's driving your ROI down, and it's also making your yield go down a lot of times. So nitrogen first, then phosphorus and potassium can follow those in a, like, together. Don't go like down with one and not the other, because you could potentially have more issues.
So what would you? Everyone's favorite talk is nitrogen. It doesn't matter like where you're from. It's probably because it's everyone uses it. in
Yeah.
virtually all crops.
You'll get soils that are high in phos, like, what's his name?
Jeff.
Jeff. And then you get guys that are high in potassium, like me.
Yes. Guys like me that
yeah.
are only high in crap, like
Yeah.
mag.
The only
I have too much of no good thing.
the only thing you really get into is high organic matter, like Travis, and that'll buff off the nitrogen side, but still applying. So people like talk about it because you're going to buy it unless you're growing like beans, and even some guys do that.
Yes, there
So-
are guys applying nitrogen to beans.
Yep.
Okay. We got asked how,
Well, you're thinking hard.
without
My brain
naming
hurts
any
just looking at
names,
ya.
there's lots of companies out there promoting nitrogen fixation, nitrogen substitution, etc. Lane actually reached out to me yesterday about this. With producing nitrogen for plants non-synthetically.
The soil's been doing it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Right. How do we imitate that? How do we get our soils doing it again? How do we, maximize? I heard a talk the other day about, training soil microbes to fix nitrogen again because they haven't for so long because of fighting other problems. Now, I mean, that's kind of starting on this huge,
Yeah.
They've bred that out of the corn because they don't want it to. There was a corn plant discovered down in Mexico, I believe it was.
South America brought
South
north to
America.
Mexico.
And it was a old seed heritage breed, and it had so much mucus coming off.
I've seen that. I've seen that
That
deal.
mucus was dripping onto the soil, producing the nitrogen for the plant. Like it was some type of bacteria in that extremely biologically activity mucus that was sweet when you tasted it.
Really?
Yes, like it looked like.
Let's call it
They call it
sap, 'cause
snot. They
you-
call it corn snot. It's dripping off of the
Yeah.
roots.
You don't like
We're so dry we never see it at home.
Yeah, when you got that corn plant growing, the embrace roots
Yeah.
are above it, it was dripping off the embrace roots into the soil. And they call it corn snot. You can Google take a picture of it. It's neater than heck.
Yeah, there was a company working on that, and essentially you inoculated I call it sap, because I don't like mucus. That's gross.
Trigger
That's about
words.
like calling it pus or something like that. It's just disgusting.
Corn pus.
It's just moist.
Yeah,
The other trigger word. The other
Yeah.
waste.
Yeah.
yeah.
So how do we, I'm trying to be very catering to the people who are extreme on one side, anti-synthetic, but still cater to the guys in the operation, myself included, to where I can't, I'm not going to raise a crop with no nitrogen. Where is that fine line of decreasing synthetic, boosting biology, and still not sacrificing yield, maximizing ROI? Literally the perfect soil health and profit combo.
So we talked before we got cut off on the last one of growing up excess nitrogen in the plant material and then breaking that down.
Down.
And that's to the point of the mucus thing.
It's clearing my passages.
To the point of that, you're essentially doing things with soils that's not naturally meant to do. You're not naturally going to grow tons and tons of material an acre to remove and then do something else with it.
Yep.
And so you got to have this nitrogen addition to support what we're doing. So there's nothing natural about farming in particular. And so what do? So, fixing nitrogen naturally and stuff, breaking down organic material. Like, what would be your take on that?
When you grow a cover crop and terminate it, and then it breaks down, it breaks down in the soil and
We don't
goes
have
through
our
a
soil.
biological activity to make nutrients available. Like it decomposes, goes into the form that the plant can pull it up. It's like composting, the worms break it down, microbes break that down, make it available for the plant. that doesn't happen in like 2 weeks time. You can't just terminate your cover crop and be like, in 2 weeks that nitrogen's all gonna be there.
So the talk of
gonna be there.
organic matter and organic material
Yep.
feeding the nitrogen fixation component.
Yep. And I'll be honest,
that
I
would
banked
be-
on that a little bit hard this year. My material breaking down to be available by July, August for my corn crop. You know, when it needed the ear fill, that's when it needs the nitrogen. We didn't get no rain.
I was gonna say, what
Yeah.
do you need for decomposition?
I had 3 foot
Water.
of biomass, and we terminated it, we roller crimped it so it was flat, and then I planted it in beautiful planting conditions, cleaned the row, like everything was awesome. Never rained, you know, and that biomass just sat there. Yeah, it was protecting my soil from the heat, but it never broke down.
Yep.
Like it literally never. I had all this biomass there that was not breaking down. and We never got no rain.
So that brings another good point. People talk about, fixing their own nutrients and stuff like that. Eventually, carbon nitrogen's ratios are gonna get
my
you.
C to N ratio was way out of whack.
Yep.
I had way too much carbon, and it was just tying it up. Well, that it still takes moisture to feed the microbes so they can work. You don't have much microbial activity in a desert.
Yeah.
It takes moisture to make the microbes work.
See, that's where I'm kind of lucky because irrigation is just very common. I mean, every field's a pivot. So when I go to a field that had a cover crop on it, there's some fields that at the end of the year, even though we've been spraying water on it, it's still not decomposed. And that tells me that biology is not as active as it should be right away. I mean, we always have that factor going on. But some of my fields that are the most better at rotating nutrition, they're gone by 4th of July. You could see the difference. Now, I mean, take in mind too, if you're planting it green versus terminated before you plant, there's different variances there, but it's just amazing field by field how much different that decomposition can be.
So water in your area,
Yes.
irrigation.
You were talking about plants having problems with things, water isn't the other one.
Yeah, that's what. Explain the water situation quality-wise.
Well, this is just based on some water tests that I took. Overall, like our pH of our water and the hardness of our water is really not, I mean, it's kind of ideal if you get that test back. So one thing that I believe we're dealing with is some bicarbonates tying up nutrition. One thing I've seen is we've really narrowed our N to sulfur ratio through our pivots. And I don't think it's because the plant needs more sulfur. I think it's because that's a natural pH buffer that's tying up the bicarbonates more. Now, like I said, this is all opinion, hypothetical. It's not research driven. But with that in mind too, one of the common things that are happening in our area too is we're fighting nitrates as well. We're climbing higher and higher, which no matters how big of a deep dive you want to get into nitrogen, but that's another negative
Plenty.
charge.
Plenty.
Yeah.
Dive.
So it's another negative
Jump.
charge. So I get to the point, and we talked about this last night about different forms of nitrogen and how effective is it to the plant. So let's just say it comes out to be 5 pounds of nitrogen every time you bring that pivot around. Well, in that situation, it's 5 pounds of all negatives. Not only that, front loading N. So you have your 32, which is say 25% nitrate. The rest of it's in your positive forms. Now, the things that I'm starting to think about is over the span of when that plant's actually going to take up N. So if we put 100 pounds early, is really what's going on is we're getting to like a 75% nitrate and 25% positive form because Mother Nature's going to convert that anyway. So I think going back to the positives and negatives, should we just be applying positive forms? Because nature's going to turn it into negatives. Now, this is a hypothetical, and yes, I'm going to test it this year. But that is a thought I've had, is how important is that? Because I guess I'm a firm believer, when you dig into the science, nitrate, and I mean, John Kemp even talks about this too, is nitrate's going to take 3 times as much water for that plant to process because it's going through so many more processes. Not only that, what other nutrients you need to have for that to convert into a protein, you know? So if you're going more strictly towards a positive form, number one, there's less steps, so you're more efficient with water. Then number two, as long as you have carbon involved, things are going to speed up and that plant's being more efficient. It's not trying to convert something. What it's trying to convert then is sunlight into sugar, not trying to take nitrate into amino acid base. So that's something that, that's my soapbox. So.
All right, guys, just want to take a quick second and say, if you haven't checked out our website, go ahead and do so. On there, we have the newsletter merch,
distributors,
list,
product list,
blogs, blogs, links to podcasts. It's all on there. Yes, I did write it on my hand, so I remembered all of it. Anyway, it's there. Links in the description. Check it out.
This brings up a point, kind of like we were talking last episode about the different soil tests.
Yep.
Tissue tests, sap tests. This is something I like about sap. It evaluates the nitrogen form in the plant. So you got all these different nitrogens. So are you even converting it?
Yes.
And that's
that test will tell you sugar
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So
So you can
tie
have
those
a,
together.
kind of like he said, this is my opinion, what I've seen, nitrates being contributed to other nutrient deficiencies. So when you have high nitrates in hay and things like that, could be contributed to that as well.
Yeah.
Which is also water. We all know that.
Yeah.
Conversions take water breaking molecules to be able to convert into sugars.
So what's the most ideal form of nitrogen?
Liquefied urea.
Yeah, liquefied urea, amine forms. I mean, you can really dive deep.
Ammonium
Organic.
sulfate.
Well, organic guys are going to use fish hydrolysase. You know, because
I didn't
it's an
use that.
amino acid. It's an amino acid chain. You know, bang for your buck. I don't know if that's the way to go, but on the same token, it is efficient. And if a plant's going to be going through stress, which I guess I haven't mentioned, I operate drones too. So that's the test of what we're going to be doing is, can you put an amino acid-based nitrogen with a little bit of K, let's just say 10 days before that 100-degree heat that's coming, just to get that plant to go through that. So we're not wasting time on stress. We're prepared for it. We get through it. We're converting more starches.
So we've seen this year in some tests where if you limit nitrogen, particularly up front, you can drive more water efficiency, not converting the excess nitrogen that the plant has no ability to control. So you're driving nitrogen addiction, tall plants, an excessive amount of water for conversion, and then lower yield.
Well, and something to add on that too, I think about is at the end of the day, those plant roots are going to try to make communications to biology. Now, those biology are going to be activated by certain soil properties that are going on. Like I get to the point of, if you're trying to, let's just say as a nitrogen product. Well, if your soil is already cycling nitrogen well, putting a biological package out there to cycle more nitrogen is not going to work. So I mean, it just goes back to a soybean. If it's really high in nitrate, those nodules may not produce. Well, it's because the plant didn't say I needed it, because it was sitting there saying I'm fine. So don't produce.
As Ben says, more biology is always more mouths to feed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, yeah, it's not going to have a symbiosis if it doesn't want it.
yeah,
And so it ain't going to have a relation with the biology. So it's essentially wasted money.
yeah. I mean, we're super pro biology.
Well,
Yeah.
when you look
Super
at the,
pro
when you look
biology.
at the Haney test and it shows your microbial available carbon, that's your food source for your biology. When you run out of food source, it starts going after organic matter.
Yep.
So you got to feed your biology.
Yeah.
And now, like, I got a friend in Australia, Tom Robinson, 3,000 acres. All of his nitrogen, liquid urea. He liquefies it all himself. Big cone bottom tank, probably 3,000 gallons. Back the tender trailer up to it. They
Vidito.
dump. Yep, Vidito does this. Michael Vidito does the same thing. Not all of his nitrogen is that way, but he does some of it that way on his crop.
Just out of curiosity, does he spike it with sulfur at all? Or is it just straight urea?
It's just straight urea as far as I know.
Okay.
He had an awesome presentation of it just over a year ago at the Regen Organic Summit.
Okay.
Pictures, video, just neat. Feeds all of his crop. He goes, he said, we've cut back on nitrogen. I thought he said it was over 50%, 70%.
Just by going to a more plant available
More plant
form.
available. Yep.
Well,
And
that's,
to be clear, the other thing is like nitrogen, it's not necessarily just to save money. It actually is cutting your own foot off at the same time. Like
expound
people,
on that a little bit.
well, because just fill in the glass, you fill it up,
Yeah.
you use the wrong form, you gotta need more water now to convert it. In the West, that's an issue. It's beyond that. You're dealing with yield drag, you're dealing with additional deficiencies, and you're gonna run short on potassium and phos and calcium, and now you're spending more money to compensate for that. And you might get a response if there's room. So it's beyond just cutting things. It's actually improving yield a lot of times.
Okay, so now I'm farming 1,000 acres, very hilly ground. We typically, this isn't me, but this is a scenario.
Sure.
Putting anhydrous out there because it's hills, we can't side dress it. Anhydrous is cheap. Put a stabilizer with it. That's our only source of using nitrogen on that 1,000 acres of hills that you can't side dress. It's all contoured.
Yeah.
Strips. What other options do I have?
Move.
1031.
But I bought this in the
Yeah,
80s
1031.
for $1,500 an acre. It's
Yeah.
bought and paid for. It's making me money.
1031 exchange.
Say sand.
We can talk about taxes the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother episode.
That's why we should dive in here.
Yeah. Is sand too?
No, it's fairly heavy ground.
Okay. You can get away with front loading. It's just a matter of what you're going to do with it.
I've been on farms where we've had a cover crop growing, front loaded a whole pile of nitrogen, and it was some of the best corn I ever grew. 32% thiosulfate, just smoked that field. I mean, we terminated it and then we smoked it with nitrogen, and it just burnt that residue, like melted it. And that was some of the best 99-day corn ever came off that farm.
So
And it was all
another
hills.
thing that I found is it, well, what are you smoking it with? What nitrogen?
That was with
32.
32%
Okay.
thiosulfate.
I'm
This
hearing
actually wasn't
smoke.
my field. It was a friend of mine's, and I was helping him, just kind of a hired guy helping him. And yeah, sprayed the field. By the time he finished on the one end, the stuff he sprayed first was like completely different color. I think it was like
The good
40 or
stuff.
50 gallons per acre, just front loading it hard.
But you did have a lot of carbon in that situation.
So in that situation, there was no carbon in the nitrogen or nothing. It was just
No.
No,
just the
like with
and
the cover
plant.
crop.
Yes, with the cover.
You know,
crop.
so
Yeah.
you
That's
have this
what I wondered.
natural buffer to convert that nitrogen into an organic form of nitrogen. Now,
I didn't even think of that.
That's
How
what I
much
was
nitrogen's
thinking, the
getting
carbon
absorbed
on the
into those
surface is what
plants?
buffed it.
Yeah.
I couldn't quote pounds, but I think I'm right. And like I said, don't quote me, but I think that's a 60-to-1 ratio, carbon to nitrogen.
This was a cereal rye crop out there.
Yeah, all the way
And it
to
was 2 foot tall.
exactly. I
Maybe
mean,
3.
everything
That
I've
dude
heard,
was
yeah.
nervous.
Yeah.
And so it was okay. Really short backstory. This field, this guy rents. It's like 45 minutes north of an hour north. Last field we planted. Don't even worry about it. We'll get there. We go to plant this thing, and he gets there, and he goes, "Oh my God, I forgot we put a cover crop out there last fall." He's like, "We got a mess," and all I'm seeing is this lush green as far as you can see. It's like 250 acres of hills. And I'm like, God, that's pretty. And he's like, "We got a freaking mess." He's like, "Get the sprayer, load it up. We're going. Load the semi. We're coming up here. We are blasting. We are smoking it. We got to plant this." He's like, "This is going to be a mess." Smoked it off, planted it. He's like, oh, he was just nervous. We got decent rain that year. We come back in the fall, and I'm helping him combine. It's like silent on the radio. And I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, I can't keep up with the grain cart. We got 2,000 bushel grain carts running after an 8-row head in goat hills. Trying to keep up to this guy, and he's like, "This is the best corn it's ever grown. It's over 250, Jesus, 98 days." Just beautiful. And I'm like, and it was nice, beautiful stand, good looking corn.
Yeah,
We
that,
turned
that's
what
kind
we
of like
thought was
that
a mess into
other deal
it'll be
with
phenomenal.
tying up nitrogen in excess into organic material, like whether you ingest it and then break it out like the plant's cover crop, or if you're going to spray it onto a carbon and then suck it in under your penalty, is a good way to buff off a front load
Yeah.
or an excess carryover,
Yep.
assuming the activity is supported enough to break it back
yes,
down.
very much so.
Yeah.
You know, and not to change gears, but you talk about nitrogen efficiency, and in my neck of the woods, I'm a firm believer that if you're applying nitrogen, you need to have some sort of carbon source with it, just so biology can start tying up to it. Then also holding it there, but then also sulfur involved with it some way, shape, or form, because that plant's going to take that nitrogen and turn it into amino acid. I want to say like 9 of the 16 need sulfur for that to happen. So you already have that. So when that plant takes that drink of N, it already has sulfur, it has a carbon. It's trying to truck into amino acid as fast as possible.
Okay, so I've started 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I've started adding sulfur anytime I have nitrogen. If I'm running liquid, I'm running thiosulfate. If I'm running top dress urea in corn, hopefully move to Y drop soon, but I'm putting AMS in for sulfur and 10-to-1 ratio. I hear a lot of the guys talk
10 to 1.
10 to 1. 10 to 1. So I'm running 100 pounds of N, I'm running 10 pounds of sulfur. And I don't know if I should be changing that based on my soils, if I should be,
I run a little higher. Mine's a 5 to 1.
Okay. I
Okay.
run a 6 to 1 to 7 to 1, but also
Yeah.
we're dealing, some of my areas, it's a blow stand. It would be, just like you were saying, put up some beach volleyball pits, you know.
Yeah.
Sell some beer.
Yep.
Yeah.
This would be a lot of volleyball pits, so.
volleyball as far as the eye can see.
Yeah.
It's right next to my hog barn, so you get a pleasant smell while you play volleyball.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a pivot, how are you changing your nitrogen program? Because you two are pivots. You and I don't even know.
I don't even wanna
no,
look at
I
one.
don't even know how to turn one on. We don't have to turn
Yeah.
how to turn one on. So
It's easy. You do it from your phone.
right. So you two guys, you know, farming in the areas that you do or consulting, how are you changing up the nitrogen program to one, gain efficiency, raise ROI, and buff off economic risk?
Well, a pivot makes everything great
Yeah.
when it comes to that.
We have Mr. Fertigation in
He's
this
here.
room.
Yeah.
He is here in this room.
Flesh and blood.
Yeah. You can essentially bail yourself out at any given time. So you essentially have this gift of experiment. If it don't work, I'll just dump it and get out. I'll dump it on, you know, and bail myself out. So for me, nitrogen, if I'm working with anybody new, nitrogen, I've always found, it's hard enough to talk on the cut. It's a whole nother thing to talk forms, and then there's a whole nother thing to talk charge.
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's like,
That's different conversations.
Yeah.
timing. That's what I focus
Exactly.
on first. Timing, because timing equals form in a way. You're not going to anhydrous if you're fertigating. Now, I have seen a dude do this. When you shoot anhydrous in the water, it flashes.
Yeah.
It gets hot and warp the J pipe coming up the pivot. So that's fun.
Fertigating with anhydrous?
Yep, shoot it into the water, and it gets hot instantly.
But it's doable?
Sounds like you're making math.
It was the weirdest thing. I think he had a ball valve, and he was just like adjusting it, and that's how he was fertigating. And he warped the pipe because it got so stinking hot. Like you don't do anhydrous, but if you ever applied it, the first sign it's on your hands, everything gets hot. Like if your glove gets hot, rip it off because you've got anhydrous on it.
But yet you can freeze your drink with it.
Oh, because on a few seconds, your hand's going to be an ice ball.
Okay.
The first thing is a water flash with anhydrous. That's what's smoking everything in the ground.
Yeah.
That anhydrous in there and just instantly burns everything off with the
Okay.
flash. So anyway, side tangent. You can talk timing, you can talk types. So you can get out of the anhydrous looking to liquid because you're not going to do it typically. And then you can start playing with the charges and stuff after that. But timing, we talked last night, I've been moving more and more to tassel on corn, more to head on wheat or sorghums. Beans, I don't even screw with that. I think that's a waste of money in my opinion.
I'm going to side dress some nitrogen sulfur on my beans this year.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but some of them.
You should do nitrogen and sulfur.
That's what I said.
Split.
I'll split.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wouldn't
Because
be
it
bad.
might be the sulfur that does it, not the
Who
end.
was talking about that?
I don't know. It was someone just the other day. They were running two different things. I think, well, I think this made this. How do you know it wasn't one? Not
Yeah.
the
Was
other?
it? Yeah,
Was
your
it?
guy.
Yeah. No, they were using KTS, but was it the potassium? Was it the sulfur? But I'm a firm believer our soybeans are sulfur short during that R3 time frame. And what's the blessing with fertigation? You know, because like what we did last year on some of our acres is we did thiosol through the pivot at a very low rate just to get some more sulfur out there. Yeah, we were throwing a little bit of nitrogen, but I don't think we were getting the bang from that. Now, with that being said, I mean, you go to Hands-On Agronomy or any of these different books, they'll talk about if you're trying to grow, 85 plus bushel beans, you're going to have to supplement some way, shape, or form.
Neil Kinsey states soybeans need 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre
Yep,
to grow. I thought he said 70 bushel beans.
I think you're right.
Now, it is a legume. It produces its own nitrogen. You put a rhizobium bacteria, if you inoculate your beans, that helps to make nitrogen as well. But it'll produce most of its nitrogen, but not all of it. He goes, we've seen significant yield responses by side dressing mid to late season some nitrogen. I believe he said sulfur with that as well.
I bet so.
But he said just why dropping some mid to late season, not a lot, but just giving it that extra boost for more yield.
And another,
I want to try it on a few acres.
Yeah.
I just want to try it.
I want to try that too, but actually adding a little bit of molybdenum there because that plant,
Yes.
because that soybean
little moly.
I think he
is
even said
making
that
so much
too.
nitrate.
Yeah.
I mean, it's converting into nitrate.
Yep.
Well, for that step process that we talked about earlier, molybdenum could potentially help if your soil pH is below 6.5. You know, because it's just not available or not as available in the soil. So I know that's one thing we're trying this year is whenever we fertigate, which we really do that, well, let's just say 3 to 4 times in a season. In that tank, we're going to have nitrogen, sulfur, boron, and a little bit of molybdenum, just to check those boxes per se. So,
My molybdenum level in my soil test that I just pulled is 0.01. So yeah, we got a lot out there.
That's a lot.
No, that's a decimal with a zero.
I know.
ahead of a number.
Yeah, but some of these micros, man, it's
Yes.
like
Molybdenum is
very
not
little
something-
is a lot.
Yeah,
it's about
molybdenum-
ounces, not pounds anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't need 5 pounds or 100 pounds of molybdenum. per
Well, you got to
acre.
be careful,
You know.
because on the molybdenum side, when ruminant nutrition, you can get a toxicity
Yes.
too.
Yep.
That's one thing I always wanted to preach to people is molybdenum is key, and I do think it's deficient. But at the same token, know what's going on, because there could be some ruminant nutrition problems. Like in our neck of the woods, it's where cattle country meets corn country. So I always got to have that perspective on the backside of what's going on and how do we utilize something like Molly to make sure we're not overdoing it too.
Well, it's like adding
So-
boron. I've
Yeah.
heard so many co-ops that are like, don't put down too much boron. Don't put down much boron. It'll feel
Toxicity.
toxic.
Boron
Well, yeah, it is on the
toxicity.
seed.
Yeah.
But I have never
Germination.
killed a crop by over applying boron.
Well, boron toxicity really is just a calcium deficiency.
Yeah, they tie together.
Yeah.
What's Michael Vitatos say? Calcium is the driver, boron is the steering wheel,
I believe that.
because they go hand in hand, or it's vice versa.
Yeah.
But yet
They go
I've
hand
got
in hand, boron and
crazy
calcium
high
deal.
calciums,
Yep.
but I fight having boron. Why?
Is it there? Because boron's very leachable.
It's very.
I mean, is
leaches
it there?
like
Period.
nitrogen.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. Rule of thumb, and I believe John Kemp says this, you can get away with up to 1 pound of boron per 3 inches of rainfall.
Something like that. It's
Alfalfa, it's extremely crucial for alfalfa. Yep.
my thing with boron, or at least how we attack it, is it's not about applying all up front. Since we have the ability for fertigation, we're just putting the product that we're using just a half a pint every time we're going through. So we're not trying to get XYZ pounds. We just know every time that we're injecting fertilizer, we're trying to get as much fertility out of that drink as possible once that situation comes. Now, there's part of me that says, are we trying to do too much? Does that just need to be 2 applications? Because sometimes we do too much and we're causing more of a setback than a gain. So that's stuff I'm tying with, and on my drive back to Ord, if I come up with the answer, I'll let you know, Josh.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't know, always had this theory, if you overdo one thing, you essentially make a plant sick. And I've seen tests that come in, sap or tissue, come in and you do overdo it, and then down you go. And it's like the plant pukes its guts out through the root system.
Yeah.
If you overdo it, you drive this insane upset. So that's why you can't fully your way through a whole crop.
Yeah.
And
Some people will say you can. I have yet to do it.
yeah. I
I'm
had a
not
guy
saying
tell me
it's
it takes
impossible.
In
it
my
takes pounds and
environment-
gallons, not ounces, and whatever. That's what I was told by several guys.
I think if your biological
If you live
system,
in your sprayer, you'd have to live.
But
Like-
you have to apply it in balance.
Right.
So you have to know. But the problem, I mean, handheld tissue analysis machines are gonna help, things like that. But you got to know, and every spot in the field's different.
Yeah.
And then if you
A
especially if you're dealing
balanced
with
spot's
something
going
that's
to be
a
different than an imbalanced spot.
if you're dealing with something has such a finite toxicity level, it's something that worries me from a guy trying to do it. So you kind of ran into that last year in the contest. It's doing it over and over and over and over. And then in the end, killed it.
This is my worst corn.
Yep. So
That sucked, man. I was. It
There's-
didn't matter
there's
that my
all these-
population. I had I had 24, 26, 28,000 out there shooting for 250 bushel corn, and I did a pass of 18,000. And the 18,000 did this exact same as everything else. Like you literally, I mean, I flagged this thing, I climbed it.
You would go by and there's just flags.
This whole field was flags, man. Every 8 rows was something different, and it didn't matter. That part didn't matter. You know, we talk about plant population, but in that case, it did not change the effect. You know, this is now binging off into what we talked about. If you don't have rain, you can't do. No matter the nitrogen you put on, it won't fix it. Actually, makes it worse because your conversion.
Yeah.
You know, you need water to convert. Then you have your problem, and so on and so forth. But
I just think if a guy is going to really get heavy in the foliar, you need to understand how nutrients move within the plant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you
don't
don't-
spend your money on foliar until you understand that.
Because if you don't, you'll
Coming
go
from
out
my
there and make your
experience.
own recommendation on the wrong thing.
yes,
Because if it's not moving up, everybody, I'm not going to say everybody, there's a lot of farmers out there think it just goes up. You just keep moving it up. And some don't work that way. Some, once they're fixed, they're fixed. If it-
mobiles and immobiles.
yes. And it isn't directly correlated to what moves in the soil either.
Okay.
And so if you don't know, go look before you start making your own recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because we hear, man, you know, potassium and boron and the micros are super needed. You know, super important at grain fill. Okay, so
There's-
what do? We just go out and we just put it on.
Yeah.
you ever
What's going on in your plant?
you ever sit in
Look.
with New Age's presentations?
No, they're ways away from me. There's really
Okay.
none in our area.
I just know her first name, Jenny. I sit in on one of hers. She does a really good job explaining nutrition movement within a plant and why it matters where you pull. And then basically the idea is why you pull lower versus the newest
Yep.
collared and
Yep.
corn
Yep.
or mature. And that is huge. So if you ever get the chance to sit in on one of those, it's definitely worth it. Any of those SAP
It's on
analysis,
YouTube.
yeah, I'm sure it's on
That'd be
YouTube.
one to look at.
SAP analysis presentation on nutrition movement in a plant. It is a very valuable lesson a guy can learn. If
When
you're
it
gonna-
comes to foliar feeding like that, I mean, there's just so many things to factor in. pH of your solution you're putting on.
Oh, yeah.
When are you putting it on? Don't put it on 1:30 in the afternoon when it's 106 degrees. You know, I did all mine last night, or at night, after I put the kids to bed. Head out to the shop. Before you know it, I got a kid in pajamas showing up down there. It's happening.
Boy.
It's 10:30 at night and he wants to help dad, you know, sneak
Yeah.
out of bed. But when you're putting it on, what's your water quality? You know, we talked about this earlier. I'm putting in an RO system, reverse osmosis, to strip everything out of my water. It doesn't matter if I'm putting herbicide down or if I'm gonna do a foliar pass. Stripping that water so the nutrients, the biologicals, I run compost extracts. You know, the stuff that we put in it is in basically stripped naked water, and it should be more plant available. And I'm doing that because of people I've talked to that have done it, that said that they've seen significant differences running RO water versus just their regular water. And we got amazing well water.
Cool.
No smell, no taste, the nitrates are below.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Some
safe enough for
people
babies
get
to drink.
chloride, salt,
You know,
iron,
like-
all these kind of things.
A lot of things
Bicarbonate.
to factor in. Don't just load the sprayer and go blow it on the plants and just, you know, we foliar fed now, we're good.
Yeah.
There's a lot of evidence and studies being done in bicarbonates and irrigation. And so if we can influence it with irrigation, what do you think that does to your spray?
True.
Now, we're putting millions of gallons, but
Yeah.
it's also mostly on the soil.
Yep.
I mean, there's been years in my area, and this is few and far between, but our dry land will do better than our irrigated just because of a potential bicarbonate problem. And you start asking the question, well, how is that possible?
I can get on a rant with that.
Yeah.
Because it's, for my area, it's wheat.
Yeah.
And for your, Iowa, well, you don't have irrigation, but your area, if it's a wheat year, the dry land will out yield the irrigated.
Yep.
It just every time. And so that's when I was like, well, we started this whole irrigation talk on applications of when you're gonna water and what all these other factors are that's making your irrigated yield less in your dry land. And you've got tenfold the inputs in that stupid thing. And so that's what drove it. But Nebraska guys, southeast area, I hear that all the time. If it really rains, sometimes it goes up in the corners when they go out through a pivot, the yield. It's not the other way. You've seen that?
I was looking for Mr. Fertigation, but he stepped out.
You got irrigation? Oh,
Lucky.
no, oh. Dang it.
The one we need him, and he's gone.
I know.
So now when it comes to nitrogen stabilization, we talked about this earlier. You said add a carbon source if you can. What other nitrogen stabilizers can we put out there? Like, I've heard of some, they're like, don't put this one with your urea or with your 28, it'll actually hinder your soil biology. Stabilizes nitrogen,
Yeah.
but it'll actually kill off your bacteria or your fungi. Or,
Being very leery of
So,
the
like-
mass-pushed ones.
And that, like in the last year, I really questioned everything before I bought it or looked into it. It's like, okay, you got a nitrogen stabilizer. Yeah, that sounds great. What is it?
Yeah.
What am I buying?
Yep.
Like, oh, it's just this.
What else
Well,
is
give me
in
the
it?
tag. I want to see the tag on it.
What
What's
else is
in it?
in it?
You know, what's it doing? Like, is there heavy metals in it? I mean, is there, what's going on here? What is it? You know,
Cyanide.
most people look at the label
in
on
some.
on a box or
in some.
food source before they eat it. You know, if you're going to eat something, you usually look at the label.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's no different than putting it on your crops.
That's one of my favorite things during the growing seasons. I'll tell growers, if somebody comes to you and tries to sell you a product, say, can I please get a label and take a picture of it and send it to me. And the reason why is I said, I want to check to see if the science makes sense.
Yes.
You know, and if they can't give you a label, just send them on their way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like, why? If they are not willing to tell you what's in the product.
Yeah.
You know, so that's one of the big things that I like, is just looking at that label, you can figure out a lot of stuff pretty quick.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
favorite pastime.
Well, that's one of the things about having a strong network of people is, you know, it's like, hey, I don't know what's in this, but I know some people. You know, I'm going to send this to Johnny. I'm going to send this to, you know, Mason. You know, or what? We got guys all over the place. What's in this? Throw it on the you know, Facebook
The group?
page. What's going on with this?
What do you think?
Yeah, has anyone used this? You know, guys, yes, I've used that. Great product. No, I have not used that. You know, yes, I've used that. Stay away from it. Do not do this. Do that. There's as much information in knowing what not to do as knowing what to do.
Yeah.
Because some, you know, yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
We're out of time again.
Yeah.
So
We got a third of the world problem solved.
we're on a roll.
One third.
We're on a roll. Anyway, cool. Well, thank you guys. Johnny, I want to do a podcast with you later on in this growing year, following up on some of the drone applications because you are specific in the drone world.
Yeah.
I think that's really unique
What size are you
technology.
at? T40?
I'm looking at getting 2 T40s. I got 3 T30s, and luckily enough, I found enough help to make sure that was possible and got them certified and all that jazz. But yeah, I think the drone world, there's going to be 2 different types of business models. One, a farmer's going to own one and do XYZ number of acres, or you're going to have somebody show up with 5 or 6 and say, we're going to get this done and get out of here.
Yeah.
So I'm going towards that second model, and I guess be the test dummy, if you want to call it, for that part of the business model. So
3 years ago, the plane guys are like, that'll never work. Now, I can tell you a dozen guys off the top of my head that have drones.
yep.
I
started
know
a
a
drone
bunch
company.
too. Yeah.
Like, it is really and they've gotten so big, they're expanding the laws and regulations, you know, like,
Well, like right now,
they definitely have their place.
I think with the number of drones I'm trying to get, I can go do 140 acres in an hour is my goal.
Oh yeah, so you're right there with a regular plane anyway,
Yep.
or better.
Yep. And one thing that I've really enjoyed is if that, like I said, a lot of irrigation, if that pivot goes around, I can do half that field and show up the next day, do the other half.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So they can keep watering if they absolutely need to.
Yeah. Wow.
You're not getting spray into the road and people's yards and stuff.
What's the top 1 or 2 things about drones people should know? Not guys, I'm not going to buy a drone.
Yeah.
But if I want to have someone come out and do a drone application for me, what's one of the tell me just real quick, first question to ask, maybe second question to ask, just kind of the first 2 things to watch out for, or I don't know.
Well, I mean, so like if a customer came to me asking questions,
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing that I really like about the drones is the speed as it's traveling at a 2 gallon acre rate. You know, I'm looking at 15. If I get a T40, that's 23 miles an hour.
Okay.
You know, that's not terrible. I mean, compared to like a helicopter or airplane. Now, I will say that aerial applicators in my area do a fantastic job, amazing job. The only thing that I argue is just that speed across is the biggest difference, and that's where I've seen 14-foot corn, and I've walked into it after I got done doing a foliar feed and seen it at my chest level. And for those of you looking at me sitting, I'm a short guy. So it just tells you that it is getting a good push. And that was at a 3 gallon an acre rate too.
On a drone or
On a drone.
Okay.
On a drone. Now, I haven't walked behind fields with airplanes, and that could be very well possible. I was just really impressed. Ear leaf was getting covered with that foliar feed, and we were trying to accomplish what we wanted to.
Yeah. Got you.
Neat.
Cool.
And test trials is the best part. So I can fill up a 60-gallon tank that does 30 acres. And with my 3 drones, it's getting replicated as it's going across. And it's no extra time to me because each drone's going through a percentage.
I'd like to do it at the field day. I'd like to do like a drone demo. Just go to a field, have it set up, and it'll just do its thing. Watch it, you
The
know.
amount of air blowing down is just like,
Yeah.
until you're there, you're
It'd be
like,
a fun thing. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
It'd be a fun thing to just show farmers because there's a lot of guys that haven't seen it.
Yep.
pretty cool.
We'll put a basket and you can sit in it and it'll carry you around.
Well, I mean, I got a 19-month-old, you know. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. My wife would kill me.
Cool.
That's
All
where
right.
kids come from. Drones.
Yeah. Not stores.
No
Yeah.
longer stored.
No
No.
longer stored.
Cool. There's the title of the podcast. Kids come from drones. Cool. Thanks, guys. We'll do some follow-ups in seasons, talk about tests and trials, what worked, didn't work, everything else. So appreciate
Awesome.
you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, subscribe, share if you want to, and catch you next time.
Till next time, farm on.
Farm on. Cool.